They were barely a month old, 4 tiny golden retriever puppies, whimpering, trembling, tied to a tree deep in the forest. No mother, no food, no warmth. Just rope cuts, the sting of cold air, and the sound of wolves closing in. Left there like bait, like they didn't matter. And no one heard them, no one, until she did. A young woman who had already lost everything. Except them. What happened next? It's a story of cruelty, of survival, and a love that refused to die. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. And if you believe even the smallest lives deserve protection, hit that subscribe button, because this one will never leave you. The wind scraped low across the frozen canopy of whispering pines, a swath of forest just outside Cedarfield, Oregon, a quiet town caught between 2 ridges and one long-forgotten promise of growth. It was early February, and dawn hadn't yet broken. The sky still held the deep, bruised color of pre-morning, and the pine needles shimmered with frost that clung like fear. In the heart of the woods, 4 golden retriever puppies were bound to the base of a crooked pine tree with coarse, scratchy rope. They were no more than 4 weeks old, fragile, unfinished things with legs too weak to walk far and eyes still too trusting of the world. Each of them bore a name whispered in the dark by a girl who had once called them family. Max, the largest, had a tiny splash of white on his left ear, and the most spirit among them. He now whined in short, painful gasps, his body arched against the biting cold. Bella, smaller and more delicate, was tucked half under Max, her head drooping, eyes dull. Charlie, with a crooked tail and a honey-colored coat, lay almost motionless except for the tremble in his limbs, and Luna, runt of the litter, nearly weightless, let out a dry, weak cry that faded almost as quickly as it came. Their fur, once soft and downy, was matted with dirt and frozen dew. The ropes dug tight into their soft bellies and narrow chests, pressing them against bark that scraped their skin raw. They hadn't eaten in hours. They hadn't been warm in longer. A puddle of sour-smelling milk had long since frozen to a patch of pine needles a few feet away, an echo of what they'd lost. There was no sign of their mother. There was no sign of Mercy. Low in the underbrush, a flicker of yellow eyes moved. Then another, and another. A pack of wolves, their coats ragged and breath visible in the cold, emerged in near silence from the edges of the trees. The lead wolf, gray with a torn ear and ribs visible beneath a pelt of tension, stalked forward, ears laid flat. He sniffed the air once, then dropped into a crouch. The whimpering grew louder. But it wasn't enough to stop what was coming. At exactly 5:04 a.m., Isla Green awoke with the heavy, drowning weight of unfinished sleep. Her eyelids dragged open like wet paper. She blinked toward the soft blue light of her bedroom, washed in the glow of a nightlight shaped like a golden retriever's paw print. Her body ached from sitting upright for hours before finally dozing off at 1 a.m., half draped over a worn couch with one hand still resting inside a puppy's crate. Isla, 27, lived alone in a modest cedar-framed house nestled on the forest's edge, a home that creaked in the wind and held the scent of old wood and chamomile. Her life had been a story of subtraction. Her father, a logger, died when she was 10. Her mother passed 5 years later after a long and bitter battle with cancer. Her grandmother, who had raised Isla through her teenage years, succumbed to pneumonia when Isla was 21. Each death left her emptier. Each silence grew louder. She was tall, slim, with shoulder-length auburn hair usually tied into a messy bun, now loose and tangled across her forehead. Freckles scattered across pale cheeks, and dark circles ringed her eyes, marks of too many nights spent loving something that couldn't speak back. Daisy had been the one spark in the dark, a rescued golden retriever with a calm spirit and an uncanny sensitivity to Isla's moods. Daisy had been her emotional anchor. When the dog unexpectedly went into labor 4 weeks ago and died shortly after giving birth, Isla had broken all over again, but she hadn't let it show. Not when she held the newborns, not when she mixed formula at 2 a.m., not when she whispered their names like prayers, Max, Bella, Charlie, Luna. That night, one of the puppies, Luna, had been sick. She was the runt, with patchy fur and a tendency to shiver even near the heater. Isla had stayed up with her, using a tiny dropper to keep her hydrated, keeping her close to her chest for warmth. At some point, fatigue won. She hadn't meant to fall asleep. Now she sat upright, spine rigid, as a strange silence settled over the house. It wasn't just quiet. It was wrong. Her ears searched for the soft sounds she had grown used to. Little yips, the rhythmic tapping of paws on the crate walls, the snuffling. But there was nothing. She rose quietly from the couch, heart pounding faster than her footsteps. The crate was open. She frowned. She was sure, completely sure, she had latched it. Inside, the small bedding was ruffled, the corner soaked from the bottle that had tipped over. But there were no puppies. Not one. "Max," she whispered. No sound. "Charlie, Bella, Luna?" Still nothing. She turned toward the back door. Her stomach dropped. It was ajar, just slightly, just enough for the wind to slip in. The lock was intact, but it hung open as if someone had not fully shut it. Isla stepped forward and touched the doorknob. It was cold. Colder than anything inside the house should be. And then, so faint it could have been imagined, a sound floated in. A distant cry. A whimper. Too far for a house pet, but too familiar for her not to recognize. She froze, every part of her going still. They were gone, all of them. And they had not gone on their own. Isla didn't move right away. She stood at the back door, one hand still resting on the cold metal knob, her breath shallow and uneven. The thin morning light had begun to tint the sky a dull gray, not yet dawn, but no longer night. The wind pressed against the house with a quiet persistence, slipping beneath the doorframe like fingers searching for weakness. She slowly closed the door and turned the lock, her other hand trembling. Something wasn't right. She retraced her steps through the living room, scanning for anything she might have missed, any paw print, any torn blanket, any trace of movement. The bottle was still on its side near the crate. It had leaked most of its formula into the fabric of the rug, leaving a pale, sour stain. The crate's latch was bent slightly outward, and the blanket inside was bunched into one corner as if the puppies had been taken quickly. Her throat tightened. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered aloud, as if saying it would rewind time and bring them back. Luna had been sick, too weak to even crawl properly just hours ago. None of them were strong enough to climb out on their own, let alone open the latch or the door. Isla knew she hadn't left anything unlocked. She had checked. She always checked. She moved through the kitchen toward the back hallway and flipped the switch for the porch light. It flickered to life, casting a cone of pale yellow across the back steps and the frost-covered ground beyond. There were prints in the snow, light, scattered marks that looked like small paws, but also larger impressions, boot prints. They were staggered, facing toward the forest. Isla's heart thudded louder. She rushed to the small desk in the front corner of her living room and grabbed her cell phone. She hesitated, fingers hovering over the screen. What would she say? That someone had broken into her house and stolen her puppies. There were no signs of forced entry, no damage, just absence. Still, she dialed. The dispatcher who answered was polite but unconvinced. Isla tried to remain calm, explaining that her puppies were gone, that the back gate had been left open, and that she thought someone might have taken them during the night. The woman on the other end asked if she had security cameras, and when Isla said no, her tone cooled further. There had been no other recent reports of theft in the area, and they were low on available officers due to an early morning traffic pileup on Route 17. Isla's frustration cracked through her voice. "These are 4-week-old puppies. If someone left them out there, they'll die. It's freezing. One of them's sick." The dispatcher paused, then sighed. "I'll file a report. If we have someone nearby, they'll check it out. But we need more than just suspicion to send someone into the forest. Try not to panic." Isla ended the call and stared at the phone in her hand. Try not to panic, as if the emptiness in her chest hadn't already swelled into a cold scream. She needed help, but not just anyone's help. At that same hour, in a cabin tucked near the edge of the Cedarfield Ranger Station, Officer Eli Carter poured his first cup of black coffee. The kitchen was small, lined with worn oak cabinets and scuffed linoleum, but it was clean. He always kept things clean. Routine was the only thing that made sense anymore. Eli was 35 years old, a former state trooper turned wildlife liaison officer. He had moved back to Cedarfield a year after losing his wife, Laura, in a drunk driving crash that left him with a scar down his left collarbone and a silence in his life that nothing quite filled. He had short brown hair peppered at the temples, square shoulders, and eyes that had grown used to grief. He didn't smile much. People found him cold, but he wasn't. Just tired. And maybe a little afraid to connect with anything soft again. The one thing Eli hadn't lost was his love for animals. Laura had been a vet tech, and they'd once dreamed of opening a sanctuary together. Now, Eli worked long hours patrolling the edge of town, responding to wildlife calls, and trying to keep stray dogs off the streets and hunters out of protected zones. His radio crackled as he sipped the coffee, still steaming. "Unit 7, come in. Got a noise complaint out of Whispering Pines. Local called about strange howling, possibly injured animal. Dispatch says no visual, just sound." Eli grabbed his coat without hesitation. The woods were his comfort zone, less talking, more listening. He zipped up the jacket, slung his badge on a cord around his neck, and headed out into the cold, the snow crunching beneath his boots. His vehicle, an aging forest green SUV with the department's faded crest on the side, coughed once before starting. He backed out and turned onto the long gravel road that would lead him toward the tree line. Back at the cottage, Isla paced. The wind outside had picked up, howling low and mournful, pressing against the windows as if the forest itself were whispering to her. She couldn't sit still. She grabbed her flashlight and stepped onto the back porch, her breath fogging the air. Her eyes scanned the yard again. Something caught her attention, something she hadn't noticed before. Along the side fence, the thin wire mesh had been cut, almost surgically. Not torn or broken by an animal. Cut clean. There were no bloodstains, no signs of a struggle. Just footprints, boots, and a scrap of fabric. A piece of a flannel shirt caught on a nail. She stepped closer, picking it up between two fingers. The edge was torn, dark red plaid. She stared at it, mind racing, then walked back inside, locking the door behind her. She didn't recognize the fabric, but something about it felt familiar, eerily so. Her phone buzzed again, a text. It was from an unknown number. Should have watched them closer, just like Daisy. Isla dropped the phone, her hands went numb. Only one person had ever spoken about Daisy like that, and she had cut him out of her life for a reason. The deeper Eli Carter drove into the forest, the quieter the world became. Trees arched high above the unpaved road, their branches heavy with frost, muffling the sound of his SUV's tires crunching over old snow and brittle pine needles. The sun was only now beginning to pierce the canopy in long, pale shafts, like fingers reaching down from heaven through winter's breath. His gloved hands rested steady on the steering wheel, but tension had begun to creep into his jaw. Something about this morning didn't feel routine. He'd seen his share of wildlife encounters, but the call about strange howling near Whispering Pines had come with an edge in the dispatcher's voice. A veteran hunter named Walt Donovan, retired, nearly 70, sharp-eyed despite the whiskey on his breath, had reported the cries. Walt wasn't one for hysteria. He lived in a rusted cabin near the northwest boundary of the forest, alone since his wife passed, and rarely called in unless something truly unsettled him. The moment his name came across the report, Eli knew it was worth checking out. Eli parked at the dead end of a narrow trail and stepped out, his boots landing firm in the crusted snow. He took a slow breath. The cold burned clean in his lungs. He adjusted his scarf, checked the radio on his belt, then grabbed the flashlight and sidearm from the passenger seat. Tracks were easy to find, fresh boot prints heading off the path and into the trees. They weren't from Walt. These were newer, deeper, more deliberate. Someone had walked this way recently, and by the look of the narrow drag marks beside them, they hadn't been alone. Eli followed the trail, boots crunching softly as he moved deeper into the thicket. The drag marks were odd, thin, shallow trenches that twisted slightly with each step, like something small had been pulled, or several small things. The air grew colder as he descended into a shaded hollow. The trees thickened here, the trunks rising like frozen sentinels. As he stepped through a break in the underbrush, a sound stopped him. Short, high-pitched, almost imperceptible, a whimper. He froze. Another whimper, followed by a rustling shift in snow. Eli moved slowly now, his breath forming ghosts in front of him. He edged past a fallen log, sweeping his flashlight ahead, and stopped dead. There, in the clearing, were 4 tiny golden retriever puppies, bound tightly with coarse rope to the base of a pine. Their fur was caked with dirt and frost, their eyes dull with exhaustion. One, smallest of the 4, lay unmoving, her flank rising only every few seconds. The others trembled violently, their cries reduced to hoarse hiccups of fear. The rope cut deep into their bellies and legs. One had dried blood on its ear. Eli's heart hitched. For all the darkness he'd seen, dead deer mauled by coyotes, frostbitten animals crawling toward roads, even the burned wreckage of cars after fatal collisions, this was the first time in years that something made his chest physically hurt. Puppies, tied, left like bait. He stepped forward, crouching slowly, one hand out to show he meant no harm. "Easy," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I've got you. You're okay now." But the moment shattered. A low growl slithered in from behind the trees. Eli turned sharply, flashlight darting through the shadows. A large wolf stood just 10 feet away, muscles tense beneath its gray and black coat, eyes locked on the puppies. Behind it, 2 more shadows stirred. The lead wolf bared its teeth, a rumble vibrating through the air. Eli stood slowly, hand easing toward the firearm holstered at his hip. He didn't want to shoot, not unless he had to. Wolves rarely attacked humans unless threatened, but these were hungry, desperate, and far from a normal pack, and they had been drawn to easy prey. "Back up," Eli muttered, trying to steady his breath. He lifted his sidearm skyward and fired a single shot. The crack echoed through the trees, sharp and final. The wolves startled, scattering with snarls and rustles, their shapes disappearing into the underbrush. Eli didn't wait. He dropped back to his knees, pulled out his knife, and started sawing through the rope. Each pup flinched at his touch, but none tried to flee. They didn't have the strength. He cut Luna free first, the smallest one, and scooped her gently into his coat. Max, Bella, and Charlie followed, cradled close against his chest and zipped inside the thick fabric for warmth. And then he heard the scream. A woman's voice, raw, terrified, calling out a name that shattered the forest's stillness. "Max! Max!" Eli turned just in time to see Isla Green stumble into the clearing, her eyes locked onto the tree, onto the broken ropes. Then the puppies cradled in Eli's arms, her face contorted as the scream became a sob, and she dropped to her knees in the snow. "Are they alive?" she gasped, crawling forward. Eli met her eyes. "Yes, all 4. One's weak, but I think she'll make it." Isla reached out, brushing her hand against Bella's ear, her breath catching in relief and horror. I thought I was too late." "You almost were," Eli said quietly. Only now did he notice the way she looked, tall, thin, wrapped in a long coat too light for the temperature. Her auburn hair clung to her face in windswept strands, her cheeks flushed from running, and her eyes were red-rimmed with fear and exhaustion. She looked like someone who had cried more than she slept. He didn't know her yet, but he could see it. This woman had fought hard for these lives. "Come on," he said, helping her to her feet. "Let's get them warm." Together they turned toward the path Eli had come from, unaware that behind the trees, a dark figure watched from the distance, eyes fixed not on the puppies, but on Isla. The emergency veterinary station was nestled between the back edge of Main Street and the dense wall of trees that bordered Cedar Field's northwest side. It was a small, boxy structure painted light green with peeling trim, its interior lit by soft yellow bulbs that buzzed faintly in the early morning quiet. A hand-painted sign outside read, "Cedar Field Animal Relief Center." It was one of those places that smelled like antiseptic, dog fur, and warm fleece blankets, strangely comforting to anyone who had ever loved something 4-legged. Eli held the door open for Isla as she stepped inside, her arms still wrapped protectively around Luna, who remained the weakest of the 4. Max, Bella, and Charlie were bundled together in a padded kennel that Eli had swaddled in towels from his SUV. The dogs hadn't made a sound since being found. Their exhaustion had overtaken their fear. "Let's get them checked out," Eli said softly, leading Isla through the narrow hallway into the back room. Dr. Simone Adler, the only vet in town who took emergency calls without complaint, had already been called ahead. She stood waiting near the examination table, a slight, wiry woman in her mid-50s with tightly pinned gray hair and sharp hazel eyes. Simone wore blue scrubs layered under a thick wool cardigan patched at the elbows, and her face had the practiced calm of someone who had seen too many broken things, animals and people alike. "Well," Simone muttered as Isla set Luna down, "this is not how I expected to start my day." She began examining each puppy in turn, her fingers gentle but efficient. Dehydrated, cold stress. One of them's hypoglycemic, she added, glancing at Luna, but you brought them in time. Isla nodded silently, brushing a tear off her cheek before it could fall. Her hands were still trembling. Eli leaned against the wall, watching. Can you keep them here for the day? At least until they are stable? Simone gave a single nod. I'll monitor them. They'll need glucose, warmth, and soft feeding every 2 hours. She glanced at Isla. And you, young lady, need rest and food. You look like you've been awake for 3 nights. I have, Isla replied faintly. 4, maybe. Go home, Simone insisted. I'll call you if anything changes. Eli escorted Isla back to the SUV. She seemed lighter now, as if the weight of terror had given way to exhaustion. Still, she sat stiffly in the passenger seat, hands wringing each other in her lap. It wasn't until they reached her small cottage at the forest's edge that she finally exhaled. I didn't expect to see them alive, she whispered. Eli parked beside her narrow gravel driveway and looked at her with quiet steadiness. But they are. They stepped inside. The place was warm, but carried the emptiness of interrupted care. Milk bottles abandoned, a blanket draped over the couch, and the faint scent of wet puppy fur still lingering. Eli waited near the door as Isla moved to the fireplace, crouched and stoked the coals back to life with trembling fingers. You should get some rest, he said gently. I'll file the report and let you know what we find. But Isla didn't respond right away. Instead, she moved toward a small bookshelf near the back wall and picked up a worn picture frame that had fallen face down on the floor. She stood frozen for a long moment, then turned it over. A man stared out from the photo, broad-shouldered, clean-cut, with short blonde hair and a forced smile that didn't quite meet his eyes. He wore a flannel shirt, the same color as the fabric Isla had found snagged on her fence. Eli noticed the way her jaw tensed, the tremble in her fingers. Who's that? He asked. Isla turned to him, her face pale. His name is Caleb. Eli didn't move. Ex-boyfriend? She nodded slowly and set the frame on the table, face down again. Then she spoke, quietly but clearly. We were together almost 2 years. At first, he was sweet, supportive, said all the right things. But over time, he started to control everything. What I wore, who I talked to, where I went. If I disagreed, he got cold. If I pulled away, he got angry. Her hands clenched. After I refused to move in with him, he showed up here at midnight, drunk. He told me, if I can't have you, no one can. And when I broke it off for good, he left a message. Watch what happens to the things you love. I changed my number, blocked him, never saw him again. Eli stepped closer, concern hardening into resolve. Is that flannel his? I think so. He used to wear that shirt all the time, said it was lucky. Eli took out his phone, snapped a photo of the fabric still in the evidence bag from earlier, and tucked it away. We'll need to find him. Isla nodded. If he did this, if he left them out there to die, her voice cracked. Daisy died giving birth to them. I promised her I'd keep them safe. Eli's expression softened, but his voice remained steady. And you did. You found them. You didn't give up. A silence settled between them, weighted but not uncomfortable. Then Isla gave a weak smile. Do you want coffee? It's instant and terrible. I'll take it, he said, offering a faint smile of his own. Terrible's better than nothing. As she moved toward the kitchen, Eli looked around the room. Simple furniture, old books, half-finished knitting projects, and pictures of Daisy at every stage of her life. It was a house that had once been full of companionship. Now it was just trying to hold on. Outside, the wind had picked up again, but inside, for the first time that morning, it felt a little warmer. The snow had begun to melt in patches by late morning, leaving slushy streaks along the back roads of Cedarfield. The sun hung low, filtered through pale clouds that carried more cold than warmth. Eli Carter stood beside his SUV, parked just off the trail where the puppies had been found. His boots sank slightly into the softened earth as he scanned the forest floor with narrowed eyes, a notepad tucked into the inner pocket of his jacket, and a small evidence bag already dangling from his hand. He wasn't alone. Deputy Rachel Moore crouched a few feet away, using a gloved hand to carefully sift through a patch of disturbed leaves. Rachel was in her early 30s, sharp-featured with a narrow frame, dark eyes, and short brown hair tucked under a knit beanie. She spoke rarely, but when she did, her voice held the cool clarity of someone who didn't waste words. Eli had known her for over 5 years. She'd transferred to Cedarfield from Portland after a failed undercover op that nearly cost her a kidney. Since then, she kept her circle small and her opinion sharp. "You were right," she said now, holding something between her fingers. Eli stepped closer. She dropped a small object into a clear plastic envelope and zipped it shut. It was a fingernail, partially broken, with traces of dried blood and dirt packed beneath the curve. "Human?" Eli asked. Rachel nodded. "Most likely torn off during a struggle. There's skin tissue. We can send it for DNA, but don't hold your breath. We're weeks from results unless we rush it." Eli exhaled slowly, the air steaming between them. "It's something. Maybe the person who tied the dog struggled with one." "I'll head back to the station, run the name you gave me. Caleb Whitmore?" Rachel glanced up. "Anything else I should know?" Eli hesitated. "Yeah, he used to date Isla Green. She found a torn piece of flannel by her fence, matched a shirt he used to wear. And there's more." He reached into his coat and handed her a second evidence bag. Inside was a shredded dog collar, blue leather with a tiny brass tag that read, Daisy. The leather was worn and stained, but what caught Rachel's attention was the tear across the side, as if someone had yanked it off with violent force. The metal ring where the leash would have clipped was bent inward. "She said she buried Daisy after she died giving birth," Eli added, "but this wasn't on her grave. It was near the same tree where we found the pups." Rachel's brows lifted. "So either someone dug it up, or never buried her at all." "She buried her," Eli said firmly. "I believe that." Rachel slipped both bags into her backpack. "Okay, I'll follow the trail on Caleb, dig into his file. Anything else?" Eli hesitated again, then added, "Have the rope tested too. Isla said it looked like the kind he used on his truck bed. She remembered helping him tie down lumber once." Rachel nodded once, and with that, turned back toward the trail, her boots making soft imprints in the melting snow. Meanwhile, Isla stood in the corner of her living room, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. The house was too quiet. The vet had called earlier to say that all 4 puppies were stable. Luna still needed observation, but the others were drinking, resting, responding to warmth. She should have felt relief. Instead, her skin crawled with the weight of unseen eyes. She stepped toward the front door and peered through the curtain. No one. The forest edge stood still, wind barely moving the high tree branches. She pulled her robe tighter and turned toward the kitchen when she noticed something on the floor, just inside the mail slot. A small slip of paper. She froze. Isla crouched and picked it up with trembling fingers. It wasn't folded. The paper was rough-edged, ripped from a larger sheet. The message was scrawled in bold, unsteady handwriting. "Don't think it's over." Her hands shook as she reread it. The letters leaned hard to the right, the way Caleb's always had when he was angry. She remembered it from the birthday card he wrote the year she tried to leave, before he burned it in front of her. Her breath caught, panic rising behind her ribs like a tide. She stumbled backward and grabbed her phone, fingers fumbling to find Eli's contact. At the station, Eli was poring over a file when the call came through. "Hey," Isla's voice trembled on the other end. "There's a note. In my house." He didn't ask her to repeat it. "I'm coming." Within 10 minutes, Eli pulled into her drive and was through the front door with measured, controlled movements. He scanned the space quickly. No signs of forced entry. The lock was intact. The mail slot, standard brass, built into the bottom third of the door, was enough for someone to slide something through, but not reach far inside. Isla handed him the note. He read it twice, lips tightening. "Do you recognize the handwriting?" he asked. "I think it's his, Caleb's. It looks like how he wrote when he was furious. I can't say for certain, but I feel it." Eli took a deep breath. "You're not overreacting. We'll collect it, test for prints. I'll have Rachel add this to the investigation." He crouched, looking over the door. No other signs he got in, but he was close enough to deliver a message. "Which means he was watching," Isla whispered. Eli stood, his expression unreadable. "I'll have a patrol car swing by every hour. In the meantime, you stay inside. Lock every window, every door." He paused, then added, "And keep your phone with you, always." Isla nodded, but her voice was barely audible. I thought he was gone. Eli's gaze softened. Some people don't let go easy, but we're not going to let him do this to you again. Outside, the shadows had begun to stretch across the snow. Somewhere beyond the tree line, hidden and still, someone watched as the front door of Isla's home shut once again. It was just past 2 a.m. when Isla woke to the smell of smoke. For a moment, she thought it was a dream, the kind where the scent of burning wood lingers after a nightmare fades. But then came the heat, low and crawling under the door, followed by the sharp crackle of fire eating its way through something dry. She bolted upright, instinct snapping through her groggy mind as she registered the faint, flickering orange light under her bedroom door. Her first thought wasn't of herself. It was of the puppies. She stumbled into the hallway barefoot, heart hammering against her ribs. Smoke filled the corridor, seeping like a ghost through the seams of the old house. Her lungs burned, her eyes watered. But she could hear them, Max, Charlie, Bella, and Luna, whimpering softly from the corner playpen in the living room. The kitchen was ablaze. The flames danced violently across the cabinets and ceiling beams, casting snarling shadows against the walls. Isla dropped low, crawling under the smoke line. She reached the puppies in seconds, hands fumbling to lift the bundled blanket into her arms. Luna squeaked in protest. Charlie gave a weak bark. The heat was intense now, suffocating. Isla threw her coat over the bundle and turned for the front door, just as it gave a loud, splintering pop. The fire had reached it from the outside. Without hesitating, she pivoted to the side window, used her elbow to shatter the glass, and screamed into the night. "Help!" But the forest was still. Then, tires on gravel, a spotlight burst through the smoke, slicing across the living room. A door slammed. Boots pounded. Isla coughed violently, crouched low with the puppies clutched tight to her chest, as Eli Carter burst through the smoke-filled doorway. "Isla!" he shouted. "Here!" she cried, her voice cracking. "They're okay. I have them." He grabbed her by the arm, guided her toward the window, and shielded her body with his own as he helped her climb through. She tumbled into the snow outside, gasping in the freezing air, the puppies still squirming weakly beneath the coat. Eli followed a second later, his face streaked with soot, eyes wide with fury and fear. Behind them, the house roared. They sat in the back of Eli's SUV, wrapped in 2 emergency blankets, the puppies nestled in towels and resting on Eli's lap. Her hands shook. Her face was covered in ash. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "One of them's burned. I think it's Charlie. He was closest to the wall." Eli reached gently into the towels, inspecting the pups with the flashlight. Charlie's back paw was raw and red, blistering at the edges. Eli gave a slow, grim nod. "He'll be okay. I'll take them to Simone now. But Isla, we have to talk. That fire wasn't accidental." "I know," she said, voice breaking. "I know it wasn't." Later that morning, Isla sat in a small sunroom, surrounded by potted herbs and knitted throws. The space was filled with gentle warmth and the faint scent of lemon balm. This was Eli's mother's house, just outside the town center, a white farmhouse with teal shutters and a porch swing that creaked in the breeze. Eli's mother, Miriam Carter, stood at the stove in the adjacent kitchen, whisking something in a pan. Miriam was in her early 60s, with silver curls tucked under a headscarf and hands calloused from years of gardening and quilting. She was short and broad-shouldered, with kind eyes and a voice like warm cider, gentle but never weak. She hadn't asked many questions when Eli called at 3 a.m., only said, "Bring her here." Now she turned and offered Isla a cup of tea, her expression unreadable but not unkind. "Drink. You won't feel human again without something hot in your stomach." Isla took the cup with trembling hands. "Thank you for letting me stay." Miriam sat across from her, knitting already in her lap. "You've got 4 lives in your care, and someone just tried to take them all from you. That makes you family." Eli appeared in the doorway, a phone in one hand, his expression dark. The fire marshal confirmed it. Accelerant near the side of the house. Traces of kerosene. Front and back doors both had burn patterns consistent with forced ignition. Isla swallowed hard. "So, someone tried to trap me inside." He nodded. "Yeah, they wanted you to go up with the house." Miriam muttered something under her breath and stood, disappearing into the kitchen. Isla didn't ask what she was doing, She didn't want to know yet. Eli stepped forward, kneeling beside her. Simone says Charlie's stable. Minor burns. The others are shaken but okay. Isla's eyes brimmed. Thank you for last night. If you hadn't been patrolling, I wasn't, he said quietly. I couldn't sleep. Something didn't sit right after that note. I drove by just in case. She exhaled a long, broken breath. Eli rose. We're going to find him, I promise. At the station, Rachel had already pulled Caleb Whitmore's full file. Multiple complaints from previous partners, verbal harassment, stalking, one arrest for trespassing. Nothing stuck. But what stood out was a receipt. 6 weeks ago, Caleb had purchased 5 meters of reinforced nylon rope and a jerry can from a hardware store outside of town. The same kind of rope found around the puppies. Rachel set the file down slowly. Time to knock on some doors. The frost had returned overnight, settling like thin glass across every surface in Cedarfield. By morning, the world sparkled in quiet defiance of the chaos that had unfolded just hours earlier. While most of the town carried on unaware, the Carter farmhouse buzzed with unease. Isla sat on the back steps with a wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders, cradling a thermos of tea between her palms. Her eyes were distant, fixed on nothing in particular. The bandage on Charlie's paw had been changed that morning. Simone had driven out personally just to check on him. He lay curled at her feet now, drowsy from pain meds, his golden fur rising and falling slowly. Luna slept nearby on a fleece mat, and the other 2 pups were playing clumsily under Miriam's watch inside. Isla had barely spoken since the fire. Eli stepped onto the porch, hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. Rachel called. He was spotted. Her head turned sharply. He came back to your house, Eli continued. The deputy on patrol saw someone near the barn out back. Ran when they flashed the lights. We followed his tracks through the woods. He didn't cover them well. He left something behind. Eli held up a small flashlight. It was dented and covered in soot. The initials CW were scratched into the base. Isla's breath caught. He was trying to come back? Eli nodded. We set a trap. There's an old woodshed near your property line. Empty. It's the only place he could try to hide without freezing. By late afternoon, the air had grown heavier. The sun was low and red over the ridge, and the shadows of the forest stretched long and still. Deputy Rachel Moore crouched near the entrance of the woodshed, her stance steady, the tranquilizer pistol in her right hand. Her voice was calm, clipped through the radio. Movement inside, breathing, might be sleeping. Eli approached from the other side, drawing his own weapon, standard issue, loaded, but safety still on. The plan was containment, not confrontation. The shed was small, half-rotten, with moss crawling up the wooden slats and rust rings where hinges used to be. It smelled of mold and old straw. Eli gave the signal. Rachel pushed the door open with her boot. Inside, curled in the corner like a feral animal, was Caleb Whitmore. 33 years old, wiry and pale, with sunken cheeks and dirty blonde hair that hung in greasy ropes. His flannel shirt was torn, one sleeve tied around his wrist as a makeshift bandage. He wore hiking boots caked with mud and the remnants of a backpack, contents strewn across the floor, an empty water bottle, dog biscuits, a folding knife, and a crumpled photo of Isla smiling beside Daisy. He looked up at the light, blinking like a rat dragged from the dark. When he recognized Eli, he flinched back. "Don't move," Eli said quietly, "hands where we can see them." But Caleb didn't fight. Instead, he laughed, a hollow, broken sound that scraped the silence. "You found me?" Rachel cuffed him without a struggle. She didn't speak. Eli crouched nearby, eyeing the scattered items. "You were going to take them again, weren't you?" Caleb didn't answer at first. Then he said, "I wasn't done." "What does that mean?" He lifted his head slowly. His eyes were glassy and red-rimmed, full of something that wasn't quite hatred, but not sorrow either. "She replaced me. With them. With those damn dogs." Eli stood. "You tried to kill her." Caleb shook his head. "No. I wanted her to feel it. What it's like to lose everything. That's what she did to me." Eli took a slow breath. "You tied those puppies to a tree. You left them to die." "I wanted her to scream," Caleb whispered, "to break, like I did when she walked away." Rachel stepped out to call it in. Caleb kept talking. "She loved that dog more than she ever loved me. Daisy." He spat the name. "Stupid mutt. I saw how she looked at those puppies, like they were everything. So I waited. I watched. I knew she'd fall asleep eventually. Eli's jaw tightened. He pulled out his phone and without a word, hit record. Caleb leaned against the wall, exhausted now. She was supposed to lose them. That was the plan. First the puppies, then the house. I wanted to see what was left of her when it was over. You could have killed her. She killed me, Caleb hissed. When she left. The words echoed for a moment. Then Eli ended the recording. Thanks for your confession, he said, voice low. It's admissible. Caleb blinked, confused. What? You're under arrest, and this, Eli held up the phone, goes straight to the DA. Rachel re-entered. Transport en route. Later that evening, Isla sat at the kitchen table with Miriam, watching Eli scrub his hands at the sink. He had soot under his nails and a shallow cut on his knuckle from a nail on the woodshed door. What did he say? Isla asked softly. Eli dried his hands, met her eyes. He confessed. Everything. Said he wanted you to feel what it's like to lose everything. The puppies, the fire, you. Isla's face went still. Did he say anything about Daisy? He hated her, Eli said quietly. Said she replaced him. Miriam reached across the table and took Isla's hand. But you're here, and so are they. That means he lost. It rained for the first time in weeks. Not a downpour, but a steady, cleansing mist that wrapped itself around the trees and rooftops of Cedarfield like a whispered apology. The pines shimmered, their needles heavy with dew. The air smelled of wet bark and moss, and for the first time in days, the wind didn't bite. It simply moved. Isla stood on the front porch of the Carter farmhouse, her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug that Miriam had pressed into them hours earlier. The tea had long gone cold, but she didn't notice. She watched the water fall in soft lines over the fields, over the gravel path, over the garden beds that Miriam had covered with tarps. Inside the house, the soft sound of a lullaby hummed through the radio, and the muffled patter of puppy paws drifted from the hallway. Eli stepped onto the porch beside her, a large navy raincoat thrown over his shoulders. His hair was damp at the temples, and his boots squeaked faintly with every step. He's gone, he said simply. She turned her head toward him. Transferred this morning, Eli continued. Mandatory psychiatric evaluation. He won't be allowed near you or anyone for a long time. Isla nodded, but her lips didn't part. Her body was still, but her eyes flickered with something unreadable. Eli added, they're charging him with animal cruelty, arson, attempted murder, but the medical board agreed that until he's stabilized, he'll be treated, not imprisoned. Yet. I don't care where he is, she said finally, as long as he's not here. Eli gave a slow nod and leaned against the porch railing. You okay? No, she replied, but I think I will be. The decision to let 2 of the puppies be adopted hadn't come easily. It took Isla nearly a week after the fire, after Caleb's arrest, to even think about it. But Miriam, ever perceptive, had left pamphlets from local shelters and rescue groups on the kitchen table one morning. A small note scribbled in the corner read, "Sometimes love is giving others a new beginning, too." That day, Isla met Doris and Frank Halley, an elderly couple in their 70s who had recently lost their golden retriever, Tucker, to old age. They lived on a small plot of land near the southern edge of Cedarfield, a white farmhouse with a pond, chickens, and a lifetime of stories in their eyes. Doris was petite, with tightly curled silver hair, thick glasses, and a voice that rang with cheerful defiance of her age. She wore a denim apron over a faded red blouse, and always carried a biscuit or 2 in her pockets. Frank, tall and thin with calloused hands and a sun-weathered face, had the quiet steadiness of a man who fixed things instead of talking about them. He built birdhouses in his spare time and had once been a fireman. When they held Bella, the softest of the puppies, the room changed. Bella, who had once trembled at every breeze, nestled into Doris's arms as if she had always belonged there. Charlie, now fully healed, waddled toward Frank and promptly fell asleep on his boot. They're home, Doris whispered. Isla cried. Max and Luna stayed. Luna was still delicate, her energy shorter than the others, her appetite slower. But her spirit had returned, quiet and stubborn. She followed Isla around the house, resting at her feet while she read, waiting at the bathroom door, curling beside her pillow at night. Max, larger now, had become her shadow's protector. He watched everything, every window, every creak, every unfamiliar sound, with a seriousness that felt older than his weeks. Miriam, in her usual fashion, built a small wooden kennel under the porch stairs. "Not that you'll ever use it," she said with a wink, watching Luna yawn from the sofa, "but it's good to have choices." Eli came by daily. Sometimes he brought groceries, sometimes dog treats. Once he brought a battered copy of The Little Prince. "I think it's the kind of book you don't read once," he said, handing it to her. They didn't speak of Caleb anymore, but one rainy evening, Isla found herself sitting beside Eli on the porch again, watching the mist roll over the pine trees. Max lay between them, tail thumping. Luna had curled under Eli's coat, head resting on his knee. "You saved them," Isla said, voice soft. "You did," he corrected. "I just ran faster." She smiled then, genuinely the first time in days. "You know what I realized? For a long time I thought Daisy was the last good thing in my life. That after her, there wasn't anything left." Eli looked at her. "And now?" "Now I think maybe there's more." Her gaze dropped to Luna and Max, then back to Eli. "You didn't just save them. You saved me too. The parts of me I didn't think were worth saving." He didn't answer. He just reached over, took her hand gently, and let the silence carry what words couldn't. The rain fell quietly. That night, as Isla tucked Max and Luna into their new blanket beside the fireplace, she paused for a moment, just watching them breathe. Her heart still ached, yes, but it beat stronger now, not just for survival, but for tomorrow. The ghosts in the corners of her life no longer screamed, they only whispered. And in those whispers, she heard something she hadn't in a long time: hope. The clouds had finally broken. After days of gentle rain and quiet gray skies, sunlight stretched across Cedarfield like a long-awaited guest. It spilled through the pines and warmed the edges of porch rails, rooftops, and front steps. The air held a scent of new grass and wet earth, a scent that always reminded Isla of beginnings. The Carter farmhouse was bustling that morning. A folding table had been set up near the front path, draped in a checkered cloth with a hand-painted sign that read, "Hearts for Paws, Community Rescue Fundraiser." Baked goods sat in neat rows on trays. Handmade dog toys crafted from braided ropes were arranged in small baskets. A donation jar jingled with coins and folded bills. It had been Miriam's idea, of course. "You've got half the town wondering about those pups," she'd said with a sly smile. "Might as well turn the story into something good." So Isla had said yes. She stood now at the front of the table, dressed in a light blue sweater and jeans, her auburn hair braided down her back. A pale green scarf wrapped loosely around her neck, a gift from Doris made of soft wool and love. She smiled as children passed, their hands outstretched to pet Max and Luna, who sat calmly beside her in matching blue bandanas. "They're naturals," Eli remarked from behind her, hammer in hand. He had just finished reattaching a plank to the rebuilt garden fence, now freshly stained and stronger than ever. He wore a dark gray flannel shirt rolled up at the sleeves, revealing forearms dusted with sawdust and faint scars. A few smudges of dirt dotted his jeans and the bridge of his nose. "They're hams," Isla laughed. "Luna especially. She keeps nudging the tip jar. She's got taste." Max let out a low, patient sigh and rested his head on Isla's boot. Luna licked the cheek of a passing toddler. The scene felt almost too perfect. Sunlight, laughter, the low hum of community. And for Isla, it was the first time in years she felt something close to belonging. Midday, Miriam came outside holding a wooden plaque. She handed it to Isla with a wink. "I had it made." The plaque was simple, carved by hand in stained dark chestnut. It read, "Hope and Scout Protectors of this Home." Isla stared at the names, then looked down at her two pups. "Hope," she said softly, scratching behind Luna's ears, "because you made me believe in it again." Then to Max, "Scout, because you never stopped watching, never let danger past." Eli stepped beside her. "They've earned it." She smiled up at him. "So have you." Among the guests was Benji Stroud, a local carpenter in his late 40s with calloused hands, a patchy beard, and a tendency to whistle while he worked. Benji was tall and broad-shouldered, but moved with surprising gentleness, especially around animals. He had lost his wife 3 winters ago, and since then, had dedicated himself to building custom shelters for rescue dogs around town. He approached with a clipboard and a grin. "Miss Green," he said with a nod, "heard what you've done for these little ones. I've got scrap redwood and a Saturday free. Want me to build them a playhouse?" Isla blinked. "A playhouse?" "Sure. Little ramp, hidey holes, maybe even a bone-shaped window, all weather sealed. It's what I do." Isla laughed. "That would be amazing." He tipped his hat. "Consider it done. I'll bring it by next week." As the afternoon wore on, a light breeze stirred the air, rustling the banner above the table and carrying laughter down the hill. The jar filled, the cookies dwindled, and Hope and Scout took turns dozing under the shade of the picnic bench. Eli joined Isla by the fence again, sitting beside her on the porch step as the last guests waved goodbye. "You really did it," he said. "I didn't do it alone," she replied. "No," he said, watching the sun dip low beyond the trees, "but you're the reason it mattered." She looked at him, really looked, into the blue eyes that had once seemed so distant, and she saw something there now that was clearer than ever: steadiness, softness, and quiet admiration. "I think I'd like to stay," she said. He frowned slightly. "Here?" "No," she smiled. "In this moment, with them, with you." He didn't answer with words, just leaned his shoulder against hers. They sat like that until the sky turned soft lavender and the wind settled to stillness. Hope barked once, Scout wagged his tail, and the world for once didn't feel like something broken. The forest felt different in spring. The shadows were softer now, no longer cloaked in winter's weight. Green pushed from every crevice, moss returning to the trunks, wildflowers blooming in quiet defiance beneath the pines. A warm breeze carried the scent of cedar and thawed earth, and the trail Isla once feared now lay open and inviting. She walked side by side with Eli, their pace unhurried. Hope and Scout trotted just ahead, weaving between ferns and tree roots with ease. Scout, larger now, his golden fur full and thick, paused often to glance back at them, eyes alert, as if still guarding every step. Hope stayed close to Isla's heels, her gait more graceful than before, tail swaying gently. Isla carried a small wooden box in her hands. The old collar inside, once belonging to Daisy, had been carefully wrapped in a cloth lined with pressed violets. The brass tag was worn but legible, its name etched deeply. Daisy. It was all that remained of the dog who had once held Isla together in the years when everything else fell apart. "Here," Eli said, stopping beneath a crooked pine with 3 wide roots that curled like arms around the earth. This was the place. Isla stepped forward. The tree stood just as she remembered, aged bark, scars from weather and time, and a memory buried into its soil. This was where they'd found the puppies, where the wind had carried cries so soft, and the wolves had come so near. But now, the clearing was quiet, golden light cutting through the branches, bathing everything in the hush of forgiveness. Eli knelt and began to dig with his hands, scooping a shallow patch of earth at the base of the tree. Isla crouched beside him. She didn't speak until the soil was ready. She opened the box. Inside, nestled against the cloth, the collar shimmered faintly in the light. She took it out slowly, brushing her thumb across the worn edges. Her throat tightened. "She saved me," Isla whispered, "not just when she was here, but even after she was gone. I see her in Hope, in the way she listens before she leaps. In Scout, when he stands between me and the dark." Eli looked at her. "You gave them a life, because she gave you one." They placed the collar into the earth and covered it gently. Miriam had given Isla a small wooden stake, hand-painted with blue forget-me-nots, and the word "thank you" in cursive. Isla pressed it into the soil, then leaned back and let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The forest answered with silence, reverent, accepting. Afterward, they sat beneath the pine, backs against its trunk, the dogs curled between them. Eli pulled out a folded paper from his jacket and handed it to Isla. "Something I found in the station's archives," he said. "Rachel wanted you to have it." Isla unfolded it slowly. It was a scanned intake form from a shelter dated 3 years prior. Name, Daisy. Breed, Golden Retriever. Age, 2. Notes, trembles when alone but calms when spoken to. Seems drawn to women. Scars beneath front leg, possibly from an old harness. Still seeks affection. At the bottom was a scribbled note from the attending officer. Gentle, needs someone with patience, could be the right heart for the right person. Isla smiled through tears. She picked me. She always would have, Eli said. Hope stirred beside her, then gently nudged her face into Isla's palm. Scout gave a soft, steady bark. No warning, just a sound that said, I'm here. The sun had begun its descent, casting long golden beams across the clearing. Light spilled through the branches like ribbons, illuminating the small wooden marker, the new green grass, and the two figures leaning together in peace. I never thought I'd come back here, Isla murmured, but now I don't want to leave. Eli took her hand, his fingers wrapping around hers without words. We survived, she said quietly, the first true smile breaking over her face. And we still love. He nodded once. That's all that matters. In the last light of day, beneath the old pine that once bore witness to despair, healing took root. Not loud, not grand, but enough. Sometimes, the deepest wounds don't bleed. They echo. They echo in the silence after a goodbye, in the cold that fills an empty home, in the fear of loving again after you've lost too much. But under that old pine tree, something sacred happened. A woman who had lost everything found new life in 4 tiny hearts. A man who had buried his past found the courage to care again. And 2 broken souls stood beneath a tree once marked by darkness, now bathed in golden light, proof that redemption doesn't roar, it whispers. Some would say it was luck. Others would say it was the resilience of the human spirit, but maybe, just maybe, it was something more. Maybe it was the quiet work of God. Not loud, not theatrical, but present, through the loyalty of a dog, through the strength of a stranger, through the kind of love that asks nothing but gives everything. Because sometimes God answers prayers not with thunder, but with pause, not with miracles from above, but with eyes that say, you're not alone. So if you're walking through your own forest today, lost or afraid or unsure, keep walking, keep listening, because healing may not come when or how you expect it, but it comes, and when it does, it stays. If you believe that every broken heart can be made whole again, through love, through grace, through the small miracles God plants in our path, share this story with someone who needs it. Leave a comment below and tell us what your pine tree moment was. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us love never truly dies, and hope, it's just waiting to be named. May God bless you, your family, and every 4-legged angel you've ever loved. If this story touched your heart, type Amen in the comments.